are back. We have our third and final guest, Dan Rowland, Senior Product Manager from Workflow Studio, here to talk to us about the AWS Step Function Workflow Studio launch. Dan, give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. So great to be with you here today, Rob and Jenna. So yeah, earlier last week, we launched AWS Step Functions Workflow Studio. So this is like a brand new way to interact with Step Functions. You can come in and you can now build workflows visually. And many of you might not be familiar with what Step Functions is. Well, it's really kind of an automation or orchestration service across AWS. So you can take AWS service APIs like Lambda and Glue and SageMaker and kind of tie them together into workflows and automate whatever you want. And so you can basically do like microservice orchestration or all sorts of different type of things using workflows. And now with Workflow Studio, we make that a whole much easier because you can now do that visually, kind of drag and drop together a workflow, configure it using forms, and then go in and deploy it.
So is this just a different way to capture business domain logic?
Yeah, in a sense. I mean, our goal with Step Functions is to allow you, like as a developer, to focus on your business domain logic. So, which a lot of times is, say, you put it into container code that's running on containers or into Lambda functions or things like that. And our goal is to help you represent business processes, right? So, like anything that can be represented as like a multi-step process is a great thing to run on Step Functions. So we have customers doing handling financial transactions, credit card applications through Step Functions. I'll just give you a few examples, like IT automation tasks. So like whether it be like managing deployments or like new accounts, account deletions. So like any type of like IT automation type task. We also have a lot of people doing like data processing. And it could be data processing on like a serverless environment on Lambda, or it could be data processing like ETL using Glue or EMR. And we also have a lot of customers building data science pipelines as well on Step Functions. So like ML ops is a big area right now. And so like combining together like SageMaker, all of the different, AWS has a big offering in the kind of AI ML space. And so you can combine all of those services together using Step Functions to build workflows. Another big one actually is microservice orchestration as well. So kind of modern cloud applications. You can use these workflows. So a lot of developers will build microservices. They all come from separate teams. You need something to tie them together and to kind of manage the transactions that are happening across these microservices. Well, that's what Step Functions can do for you. We can run at a pretty incredible scale. We can manage kind of millions of transactions or workflows that might be running in parallel. And so it's a great kind of microservice orchestration tool as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I was just going to say it. So Step Functions is really helping you configure some of these transitions and different states that it goes through, helping developers focus more on the actual business logic as opposed to writing code that has to handle all of those different transitions.
Yeah, and let me give you another example. Like error handling is a big reason why some customers use Step Functions. So it's actually a lot of code that you might have to write to handle all of the different errors that could happen. Like, I mean, what if your function or your code has a failure in it, and has an exception? How are you going to handle that? Well, one thing you can use Step Functions for is you can say wrap any call to any API up in like error handling logic. So you can specify like, these are the retries that I want for my service integration. So you can retry it 5 times, say with an exponential backoff. You could specify like a catch handler. So ultimately, if the retries fail, you can specify a path through the workflow that's going to catch the problem. You can also do like timeouts and things like that. And you're all specifying that in kind of configuration code rather than having to write code for all of that. Step Functions takes care of that. And so you can focus on the things that are really the code that really kind of makes a difference for your business.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up. And Dan, I think you're going to have to forgive us because, I know you're here to talk about the new launch with with Workflow Studio, which I understand is a visual tool. That's the feature we launched. But I think we're going to have a lot of questions just about step functions, because I think this is I think this is an underappreciated, underused tool within AWS. And I think a lot of people in chat are going to be ready to absorb what the key benefits are, not just of Workflow Studio, but of the underlying foundational component of step functions. But with that, I mean, I think the concept of error handling and what you do there, I think this is a very important and interesting point that you made, because when you switch over to a microservice architecture, oftentimes you have what we're calling logical workflows here, right? Like processing an order for e-commerce, or like you said, one of those steps might be charging a credit card, or reducing or holding an item from inventory, right? Or dispatching something to be shipped. And each one of these steps, unfortunately, is highly error prone. And if we think about this, as we were walking through that, I'm thinking back to how this was traditionally done, where we would once have a monolith, and we would have imperative code that just went through this and says, okay, here we're at step 1. What we're going to try to do is validate the customer order, right? We're going to check the inventory. We're going to do this, and this would all be in just step-by-step imperative procedural code. And then in there, every one of these would be wrapped in some sort of, hey, here's the error. Okay, we got an error. We log this, and then we say, what do we do with the workflow? What I like about this process that you're describing is that a step function really kind of takes that workflow that was originally kind of almost hidden in the code and making it a first-class citizen. It's almost saying as if, wait a second, this order thing, this flow is itself an object that you want to reason about as a standalone entity. Where it encountered an error is just another property of that flow, but the flow itself is a first-class citizen. And I think that pattern leads to some successful outcomes, right? It's just kind of like how functional programming leads you to some successful outcomes. I'm not saying functional programming is the be-all end-all, but there are clearly examples throughout even the last couple decades where we've seen that there are patterns that can lead you to successful outcomes pretty consistently, and I feel like this is one of them.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, what we've kind of discovered is that there's a lot of customers that they come in and derive like tremendous benefits from step functions, like the benefits that you've alluded to. But like until we launched Workflow Studio, it was just a little too hard to kind of go and grasp onto those benefits, because you had to kind of come in and learn a new language. And so there's a lot of people that made that investment to do so. But when it comes to like kind of bringing on their teammates and kind of getting them to become comfortable with step functions and getting all of these advantages, it took a little bit too long sometimes for like full teams to kind of ramp up on this service. So that was one of our goals right now, is to kind of take this like orchestration ability and the like error handling capabilities that we've been discussing and make it more accessible, so that more developers could kind of learn it really quickly, pick it up fast, and then start using it as part of their like cloud application development, or add a new tool to their toolkit easily.
Absolutely. So, I mean, along that lines, though, we were talking about monoliths and how this was done in the past with imperative code. Maybe you can walk me through that, or maybe you've got that wrong. How were customers building these workflows, let's say before Workflow Studio, and then even further before step functions?
Yeah, great question. So like to kind of replace step functions, like the traditional way of doing it, like you said, was like you write a lot of imperative code, and you need to think through like every single thing that could go wrong within your application, and kind of write error handling code for that. And then, but there's another piece of this that actually you had to do as well, which is actually, let me just zoom out a bit. So like building a distributed application, you're building something that's pretty powerful, because this is something that can scale up and kind of manage millions of transactions at once. So you're creating, like, the scalability is another thing that you get for free, kind of on top of serverless, like step functions, Lambda. Some of these other services are serverless, so you don't have to worry about kind of scaling up and things like that. So we kind of like solve that problem. And then there's the whole like operator experience. So this would have been something that you would have had to code from scratch as well, right? So like, how do I have maybe I'm running like an e-commerce store, e-commerce process, and I have all of these transactions, and some operator needs to kind of look through them and spot failures, and kind of like and deal with those failures when they happen. And so that's almost something that you get for free with step functions, because like when you build a workflow, like at this e-commerce transaction that you might build, build, or like, let's say you were building like a food delivery service or something like that. Like every order that comes in, you might trigger that with an event. Like it could be an API. It could be an event from Event Bridge that says, hey, we have a new order. It kicks off this workflow. That workflow is now tracked start to finish. We actually checkpoint every transition through the workflow, so that if there's ever a failure, it can start. Like that workflow will complete. We kind of guarantee like once and only once execution, which is like, imagine like really important for things like banking transactions. And then we provide a visual way to kind of like monitor all of these transactions. So you can sort through the ones that passed, the ones that failed. You can see how long they took. We even support X-ray, so you can go in and kind of trace your workflow and like look at. I mean, if some of our customers, the performance of the workflow is really important. So you can go through and kind of analyze the performance of it as well using X-ray. So I think if you use step functions, there's a lot of things that you get for free that you don't have to build. That if you were kind of working in that kind of just a pure imperative coding environment without access to the service, you would have to build a lot of that from scratch.
So under the covers, what is Workflow Studio generating? Is it doing the JSON and YAML underneath?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So one of the beauties of so previously, before Workflow Studio, there's a couple ways to create your workflows. So like the state machine here is synonymous with workflow. So we use a state machine kind of concept, and you would build these state machines in a language called the Amazon States language. So this was actually created by a gentleman who worked for AWS, who was actually one of the original creators of XML. It's a inherently visual language. We could always visualize the workflow, but it wasn't until now you could actually come in and build visually. So you would either be coding up in like JSON or YAML. Another option that was available was CDK. So you could build your workflows imperatively kind of in like Python or JavaScript or Java. We also had another option, which was a data science SDK. So you can actually go like pip install step functions, and you can install a data science SDK and use that within Jupyter notebooks to build these workflows using Python. So there's definitely some options available to kind of build these imperatively, where we're continuously working to enhance that. And then we created, but another thing that we heard from developers a lot is like I do like working with these JSON or YAML files, but it just takes me a really long time to build them out, and it's kind of awkward. And so we didn't just have kind of the newer developer to step functions in mind when we built this new tool. We actually had the seasoned step functions developer in mind as well, because like to provide kind of prototyping capabilities and the ability to generate the boilerplate for your workflow. So generate the JSON and YAML. I haven't heard too many people that tell me that they love writing these long YAML files. So
Right.
So this will generate them for you, right? And then you can go in and edit all of the different parameters and things like that once it's built out. So great, and also a great way to like prototype and like share with others on your team. Get like link in the business team members or things like that. Show them your workflow.
Yeah, even just being able to visualize the entire flow, whether it's one flow or across flows across your entire system. It seems like that is a good thing that developers will need to have versus just seeing it in their JSON or YAML.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, developers consistently tell us that the ability to like visualize that JSON or YAML file has been a huge help to them.
Yeah, so I want to make sure I heard that correctly. If you're a seasoned Amazon States language user, or you've worked with step functions a lot up until this point, that underlying source of truth, that YAML file, that can be loaded into Workflow Studio, and there's full feature parity with whatever existing state file you've already got. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So basically this what we show in Workflow Studio is an exact visual representation of the code. So of the workflow definition. So everything, including like all of the parameters, is either accessible through like forms, or it's accessible through like the visual image that you're composing. It's actually with the click of a button, you can view the workflow code. You can click on like like a workflow state or step and view the code associated with that. So we didn't want to, our goal here was to make it easier to build, but not to move too far away from the code, because we know that that's important to a lot of people. And in fact, we want this to be a teaching tool to actually learn that code as well.
So for customers who are building domain logic, how is this helping them?
Mm-hmm. So for customers building domain logic, I mean, I mentioned this kind of prototyping exercise that you could go through. So let's say that you had kind of an idea for like a workflow that you wanted to build. So let's say you were building a food online food ordering has become like quite a thing during the pandemic. so I mean, these apps where you can kind of order food from your phone obviously have like some sort of workflow behind them that kind of manages the transaction from like the restaurant getting through the order through the billing to this like food arriving at your house and you making sure that you're satisfied with it. So you could go using Workflow Studio, you could build out that whole flow, right? And then what you could do is you could, like, your value is in, if you were building that type of system, your value is in like your review and rating system, right? The way that you manage the drivers that are going to like pick up the food with you, your relationship with these restaurants, and the code that manages all of that, right? So you could build up this workflow, right? And then you could go and you could fill in your domain, like say create Lambda functions or use ECS and have containers that kind of run the code for the business logic for each of your critical steps. So what we're kind of saying is like, focus on that business process, which you define using step functions, and then focus on your business code or logic, which is running in a different service invoked as part of this workflow. And if you build a microservice architecture, you get all the benefits of having, like, you can have different teams maintaining each piece, but this workflow like ties it together.
Yeah.
So I'll be the first to admit that I'm probably more comfortable and familiar with writing imperative code in some sort of programming language that orchestrates all this in a single process, as opposed to breaking out into a workflow orchestrator such as step function. Now, and one of the reasons I think I'm more comfortable with that is because I can do things at different levels of abstraction, right? So in one case, I can make an API call to go and say dispatch an order to a third-party service. I can charge a credit card through Stripe or whatever. But at the same time, I can mix that. And maybe this is not a best practice to mix things of different levels of abstraction, but I can also do something very, very granular, like incrementing a database field. Do we have this level of granular control in step functions? So what I mean is, can I create a step function where maybe one of the steps is to increment a field in DynamoDB? How would that work?
Yeah, great question. So we're constantly working to kind of add two things into the service. So like, one is more service integrations, and the other is sort of more kind of like lightweight code capabilities. And so last year we introduced some new like intrinsic functions that allow you to do certain capabilities, and we do kind of continue to work on more of those. The answer to like anything that you can't do within a workflow is typically to create like a lightweight Lambda function. So if you need to, so to give you an example, like for DynamoDB, you can use like put item and get item, and so you can put things in and out of the database. If it comes to like something like math, today you do need to write a Lambda function to do that math for you. But we are actively working to kind of reduce the number of, say, really lightweight Lambda functions that you need to write that are just kind of built under the context of your workflow, or for the context of your workflow.
We've talked a lot about how and why we'd use step functions and the Workflow Studio. Tell us about how we'd actually go about building a workflow.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, I think we'll demo this in a little bit, so you'll see visually how we do that. But yeah, you would just go to I mean, you've got a couple of options. So if you want to start building locally, we do have an extension that's part of the AWS toolkit for Visual Studio Code, and you could download that. And there's a couple of sample applications, and you could start playing with those, especially within like AWS SAM. So you could start building using SAM or the CDK, or the other option, which is now newly available, is you come into the console and you start playing with Workflow Studio. You start with basically a blank canvas, and you'll have service integration the various flow states that are available to you. You can drag and drop those onto the canvas, and then the different options are exposed on the right hand side, where you can go in and configure things. The interesting thing about this is like to really learn about the Amazon States language in depth before, you could go read kind of stateslanguage.net, and it had all of the it has kind of an exhaustive reference of the Amazon States language. And I've actually found myself, like over the last week, as I go in and play with it, like learning just by going in and playing with it and building a workflow. So you can actually put in placeholders, like if you don't have the resource created yet. So it just kind of like skips over it. I'll show you that in a minute. So you can build up like resource or workflows from placeholders. You can swap in real resources once they're available, kind of gradually build up your workflow. And that's how I would recommend doing it, is kind of do a sketch almost first, and then gradually add the resources in to make it start to work end to end. And then to kind of finish off the whole flow, right, it's going to generate Amazon code in the Amazon States language, so a JSON file for you. We're going to be building in export options to like CloudFormation and SAM. We're also hearing requests for CDK export from customers. So we're going to be building in more export options. So you'll be able to go right from this visual tool like into CloudFormation, and then deploy that as part of your infrastructure as code.
We've been talking about the step function as a way to stitch together a number of different microservices. But when we're talking about microservices, you know, one of the things that stands out to me is the ability for these different teams to have independent units of deployment, right? You own your own microservice. You can choose when and how to version that thing, and I can choose when and how to version my microservice. That's what helps us achieve agility at scale. Now, how does this work in conjunction with step functions? Because now let's say I have a step function that stitches together 5 different microservices. As those microservices are continuously being updated and versioned, what does testing look like to make sure that the step function as a orchestration of these microservices still does what I expect? You know, how does this work with, let's say, any sort of CI/CD pipeline that I have in picture? Can you talk about that?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So basically today how it works is that so if you go and you update your workflow definition, versioning is built in under the hood, in the sense that every new workflow that you kick off is going to use your new workflow definition. So let's say that you had a resource that supported versioning. You could go in, like edit your workflow definition. You could either use an alias for that resource, or you could use the actual like version number. If you use the actual version number, say for a Lambda function, next time you go and you kick off that workflow, basically it's going to all of your old workflows will complete using the old version of kind of the resource. The new ones will be kicked off with the new version, and basically you'll kind of have a clean transition. In terms of like unit testing, so we do have a container that you can download. It's called like Step Functions Local, or a Java jar file, and you can use that to run workflows locally. And we are something we have heard as an ask from customers is for us to introduce like formal like versioning and aliasing capabilities for step functions, so that you can actually deploy the state machine safely and kind of traffic shift between the workflows. And so that is a request that we have heard. We are taking that one seriously, and I'm hoping that we can have some exciting announcements around that one a bit later this year.
Let's talk about security for a minute. What does the IAM policy look like for this?
Yes, the IAM policy. So you do need to build an execution role for your workflow, and ideally that execution role would be kind of a role that gives the least needed, or kind of the least privileges required to invoke all of the services associated with your workflow. That can be auto-generated from the console. So we will, if you create a state machine in the console, it will suggest a role for that state machine based upon the service integrations that you've chosen. If you build locally, you don't have that capability, but so you would need to kind of go in and create a role execution role for your state machine. Even for the ones generated from the console, we would highly recommend going in and kind of going in and looking at those and making sure that you're comfortable with what's in there. Also, from a security perspective, something that we always recommend customers is not to pass kind of personal identifiable information through the workflow. So from a security standpoint, so there's different ways of handling that, because you may not want your operator to have access to all of that data. So you can, for example, encrypt the data going through the workflow, or you could choose to pass a token that would say be used by the services to pull the data out of S3, and that's what you could pass through the workflow. So yeah, that's another kind of security recommendation that we have.
Awesome. Well, Dan, I heard you say earlier that you can show us a demo. If you'd be willing to do that, I think we can really.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to be right back. Dan will share his. Maybe we don't need to be right back. You know what? We're going to do it. We're going to cut to the holding screen. Dan's going to get set up with his demo, and then we will be back in a moment. Just hang tight. Back. Dan, take it away.
Okay, so I just want to give you a quick demo of Step Functions in the new Workflow Studio. So if you come to the landing page in the console, you're going to see something like this. If it's your first time here, you can click Get Started. It just introduces you to this little Hello World workflow. It'll create the workflow for you with a new. Actually, going through that with a new role. You can create the state machine, and then it's just to kind of show you an example of how this works. You can click Start Execution, and it's going to run through a Hello World workflow, and you can kind of explore. So this quick and easy way to generate and run your first workflow. You'll see down up here kind of a graph of the execution. So green is good. It shows you the path of execution through the workflow. If I were to go and change this to false, you'll see that basically, if it was to rerun, it's going to take a different path. It fails. Failures show up as red. And then down here, you can see the event execution history. You can click into each of these, and you can understand what went wrong. So you can see the data that's passed in, the role that it's run with, and you can see so anything that you need to see to debug your execution. So. But now for the more interesting part. So I'm going to go and I'm going to create a new state machine here. And this takes you into the new Workflow Studio experience. So you have three options. So you can design your workflow visually using Workflow Studio. You can write your workflow in code using code snippets. So this was the experience that we had previously. And let's click on this for a sec. We have a whole bunch of sample projects. And if you're trying to figure out how to use Step Functions with a different service like API Gateway or Athena, or trying to figure out how to use it with Step Functions, or sorry, SageMaker, like this is a great place to get started, and it'll show you down at the bottom like what the workflow looks like that it's going to generate. You can click next, and you can deploy a CloudFormation template that gives you all of the resources that you need to get started quickly. Here you'll see two options: standard workflows and express workflows. We're going to use standard workflows. These can run for up to a year. Express are used for like if you want to build an API using a state machine, or for like data processing or things like that. These run for up to 5 minutes, very fast, very low cost. So like two different types of workflow based on like state machine that you can build. I'm going to click next here, and you'll see here that so I'll just give you a quick orientation to the new Workflow Studio experience. So over on the left-hand side here, you have all of the API actions. So these are all of the services that we support. You can just drag and drop them into the workflow, and you can keep going and drag whatever services you want. So like if you wanted to have a glue job, you could drag that in here. You'll see here the definition. So as I go and I add resources, the definition in the Amazon States language is added over here, and that's fully transparent. And then you can go into each of these, and you can configure them. So I could basically select a name for the Lambda function that I want to use. I can click view function, takes me into the Lambda experience. I can see the code that I'm dealing with, and sometimes it takes a minute, so we'll come back to that. And then you can configure the error handling over here. So by default, a Lambda function comes with some like error handling configured. So if I click on this, I can see like for these exceptions, I'm going to do a retry on this Lambda function every 2 seconds. It's going to retry 6 times, and it actually has an exponential backoff configured. So it's going to retry every 2, 4, 8, etc. seconds until the retries are exhausted. Here I could add a catcher. So basically, if I experience a certain error, then I could have a fallback state, and so I could select any one of these, and basically now if I have an error, it's going to go to that state. Obviously, be more beneficial to have kind of a failure state that you would go to as part of this, but yeah, and then you configure your timeout and your heartbeat. The other important thing to know when you're configuring these is data flow. So this is a really important concept, and it can be a little tricky at first to kind of understand it. And that's where this help is actually your friend. So if you click on any of these info links, it's going to explain to you what like these different fields do that kind of transform the data that's flowing through your workflow. So you think of it like at the start of your workflow, you pass something in, like a JSON into the workflow. That JSON is passed down through the states, and you can kind of manipulate, like choose what you pass on, choose what you pass to each service integration. And then when the service integration returns its response, you can actually filter that response. And that's what this is for. So input filters the response going into the service integration. You can craft the parameters that go into the service integration as well. And so basically take the input to the state, massage that, and then send that off to when you invoke the service integration, and then the response back from the service integration. So in some cases, we'll suggest, okay, here's what a typical response looks like, and then you can go and you can use things like the result selector to select a piece of this response and pass it on, because you can only pass 256 kilobytes of data like through the workflow, and some responses are quite large, so you do want to pair them back, and you can combine that with kind of the input to the state and the response from the service integration. So just this is something that you can read up on, and we've built in help for it over on the side over here. The last but not least, I just wanted to show you these flow states. So these are the different types of, this is how you can kind of manipulate the flow of the workflow. So we support a whole bunch of different ones. I'm just going to just give you like really show you how I would prototype out a workflow if I was doing this myself, right? And so like we have something called a path state. This is a state that basically just takes the input, passes it to the output. It can be used to manipulate data. So and you can name these states. So process, new, rest, new, food, order, and you can basically mock out the workflow kind of like this. So if I wanted to add in a parallel state right here, what I could do is I could insert a state here, and what this is going to do is I could say validate credit card, and then I could drag and drop another one over here. So these can obviously all be services, and this one might be confirm restaurant, or confirm order with restaurant, and then you can continue to kind of build out this workflow. So for example, like what I might want to do is then put in a choice state, and what this choice is going to do is so I might have say a Lambda function right here, and this function checks if food is ready, and then I could have a choice state here, and I could configure that choice state with a rule that might say, hey, like add a condition. So if food ready is is equal to boolean true. So if the food is ready, I may want to go down to this state right here, and this could actually be, I actually have like a SNS state configured. So I will go, you can just delete things like that, drag a new thing over here. And I actually have an SNS topic that it'll send a message out to the customer. So this one actually goes to my cell phone, and this could be send notify driver order or food is ready. So this will dispatch the driver, and then what I could do is I could actually put a pass state in over here, and I could say, okay, well, if it's not ready yet, I'm just going to loop back to this lambda, and this lambda function is going to check again to see if it's ready. So I could basically go and change this end state to check if food is ready. So now I end up, let me just zoom out. And so now I have like a little like prototype workflow that's like emblematic of what I want to build. I could have used all of the service integrations that I intended to use as well. The challenge with that is then I can't actually go and like run the workflow unless those like service integrations are configured properly. So that's where sometimes these like pass states can be your friend. So this is just an example of me kind of prototyping out a workflow, and then I'll go and run a workflow in a minute, but just wondering if there's kind of any questions or comments before I do so.
I like this, and we haven't even gotten to the point of configuring error conditions or retries or rollbacks or anything like that. Can you maybe show a little bit about that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, if I have an error, so let's say I have this. Actually, let me just add a new lambda right in here, and let's call this check confirm credit card is actually, sorry, I'm gonna drop this down right here, and let's call this process payment. Okay, so you might be using like a totally separate like payment system that's not on AWS, and so you need to interact with that. You could create a Lambda function that would make the call out to like Stripe or whatever payment system that you're using, and it would then make that call to the payment. But like, what if the system is down? What if just it comes back with an error response, right? So if I go in, I could configure. So by default, the Lambda function, as I mentioned earlier, does have a retry associated with it. So I may actually want to retry like every 2 seconds, or like 10 times. I may not want a back off rate. So I'll just set that to 1, and I might want to kind of like retry like every like 1 second here. And so like if that payment has failed, then I can basically keep retrying. But you may have like it may ultimately fail, and like maybe the credit card was invalid or something like that, right? So now I can actually add a new catcher here, and I can have a fallback state. So I'm going to specify. So I'm going to just say that let's say that the task failed. Now you'll see here that yeah. So I'm going to add that the task failed. I'm going to specify a fallback state. So I'm actually going to add a new and I'm going to add a fail state over here. So it is going to that's not quite what I want. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a state at the end of my workflow right here, and I'm going to say failure. So if that payment ultimately fails, what you can do is you can direct it at this failure state, and kind of like that. And you could take that failure state, and after that you could basically put a failure. And like if it took this path, so actually this one I'm going to adjust, and I'm going to say the next state is actually go to end, right? So now I've basically created, I have retries. I have this Lambda function protected by retries. I could have configured a timeout for it, and I have this like failure path. So like if it ultimately fails, it can take a separate path. And what I could do is you can implement something like a saga pattern. So you can actually like unwind, like I've already told the restaurant that we're going to make this order. So I should probably go now and like tell the restaurant that we want to unwind this transaction. So I could have like subsequent states inserted in here that would kind of basically unwind that and kind of undo some of the things that were already done.
This is really slick. I think you really illustrated how useful this tool is, not just in building these step functions, but even in prototyping. I imagine this is a fantastic tool to communicate to your team visually just what is going on with some really complicated processes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we have a lot of customers who did this actually previously. So they would do it by hand and kind of code it out. And then they would dump out like the number of requests that we had originally to say be able to download an SVG file of the image so they could go into documentation and things like that. Like whether you're using this to build like a machine learning pipeline or a CD kind of a deployment-based workflow, like being able to download that image and put in the documentation or to share with others, it is a very, very useful artifact. So yeah, like while you're prototyping, it's useful. And then once you've completed kind of as an artifact to store to show what it actually is. Yeah, a lot of customers have told us very, very useful from that standpoint.
And I want to mention one thing, especially in the presence of an expert guest here. But Lambda functions have a 15-minute timeout.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes them ill-suited for running a lot of really long-lived workflows. And it seems to me, and I've seen this in documentation, I don't know to what extent this is still true, but it seems to me that step functions is the perfect complement to that. To the short-lived nature of a Lambda function. Suppose that you, for example, need to run a Lambda function as part of a cron job style interaction. This seems like a perfect tool for that. I mean, by the way, that's half statement and half. Is that still the case? Is that what you would recommend?
Absolutely, no, 100%. So like there's a really tight correlation between like step functions and Lambda, and once customers start using have more than a few Lambda functions, a lot of times they come over to step functions and start using them together. So like the mantra of step functions is like don't pay to wait. So you can have a workflow running for up to a year. Think of like a human interaction. So like step functions will sit and wait there patiently. If you're say shipping a parcel, it'll sit and wait there patiently until that parcel is shipped without costing you anything. So you pay for state transitions. Whereas and then you use Lambda for your business to kind of like run your code. So then basically use step functions to maintain state throughout that full process, Lambda to run that code. And it's a really nice kind of combination. You can have like applications that based around Lambda and step functions that run for a full year. And without costing you very much at all. Another thing that customers often do, like let's say like image processing or kind of like data processing type workflows. Some customers even build like decision logic into their workflow that can decide between Lambda and ECS. So you might want to use ECS for kind of running long running jobs that run over 15 minutes and Lambda for the short running jobs. So we have customers that kind of use this workflow to make those type of compute decisions as well.
Yeah. One question I had is, let's take the most trivial example where we have a step function that consists of two Lambda functions invoked in serial. I understand that while the Lambda function is running, or as you say, we're not paying to wait. What, if any, latency should I expect step functions to add on top of that? So, I'm talking about function A completes, the step function will then take the output result of function A and then pass it to function B. So forgetting about edge cases. Let's just say that it returns some trivial value, and I want to pass that to function B. Does step function add any sort of noticeable latency between that invocation as compared to say if I were to do this orchestration within a separate process?
Yeah, great question. So it actually depends partly on like what type of workflow you're using. So like express workflows, you'll notice like much lower latencies. And so we have customers using those with like really latency sensitive customers using those for like kind of high volume, low latency like transactions, say as part of like, okay, I have like a user takes an action on the cart and I want to create a workflow that's an API that kind of that handles that action. So like those type of customers or like banking applications care very much about like the latency of the workflow. And so like that's where kind of like latencies in low milliseconds are really important, where standard workflows you might see like a bit of higher latency in the sense of like maybe like 50, 100 milliseconds kind of introduced in there. And so yeah, it depends on what flavor of workflow you're using and what you care about. I know like latency isn't so important for a lot of customers running like AI, ML, like ML ops, data process, like certain types of data processing jobs, like really important. Other ones not. So yeah, depending on the use case. And then that's another thing we're always working to kind of get down is like increase our limits, drop our latency, especially when it comes to like working with Lambda.
Yeah. And my other question here was, so can I nest step functions? Can I say this whole thing, this is the food ordering workflow, but now I want to turn this thing into a black box and put that thing into another workflow somewhere else?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for calling that out. So we actually you have step function start execution here. So what this allows you to do is invoke one workflow from another workflow, right? So let's say that I actually wanted to like, I don't know, I had a like workflow that like check for malicious customer or something like that, and that was like a totally like separate workflow that I built out that I wanted to kind of standardize on and run a part as part of like a lot of different so like a fraud check or something like that, or all sorts of different use cases. So like basically what this can do, this can invoke another workflow from step function. So you can nest them together. We have customers that nest like multiple levels deep. When in the operator experience, we tie them together nicely, so you can actually like drill down between kind of the parent workflow and the child. So yeah, that's something definitely that a lot of customers do. Some customers even use that to build up a library of state machines and share them with others.
You real quick just share how customers can inspect a workflow when something goes wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm going to do is I'm not going to try and run this one because I've just kind of like hacked this one together. so I'm going to.
And I threw you off with the air conditions.
Oh yeah, that I was doing on the fly. So
Yep.
okay, so basically, let's go into so we have this little demo workflow that's available to anyone. So I'll just show it to you. It's like a little like stock simulator. So it'll check like a stock price, generate a random number in Lambda based upon the number, do a buy or sell recommendations, and then it either buys or sells the stock, and then it issues an SMS message to report the results. So I can basically go and run this workflow. So we don't really care about the input to this one. So yeah, you specify a JSON input at the start, and I'll go and run this. And so you have two options in this in the execution view. So you can click on any one of these, and you can see you can navigate to the CloudWatch logs. You can see what resource was used. You can look at the step input. So obviously nothing was input to the step, but you can see here the Lambda function returned a stock price of 50. So you can actually navigate through the whole workflow. So now you can see, okay, this next Lambda function issued a buy recommendation because of the stock price that it received. So when it gets here, it's going to say, okay, buy or sell. It's obviously going to take the buy path, and it's decided to buy 5. It's got a timestamp on here, and so you can navigate through what happened right here. The other option is it actually down here has all of the events like listed out, and so you can navigate to both both like the Lambda function or the CloudWatch logs. So let's say that I go over here and I introduce a, okay, so I'm just going to introduce like some sort of a error in here. Like let's just say a variable that that doesn't exist. And I'm going to go back to step functions, and I'm going to try this. I'm also doing on the fly. Okay, so here we go. So like this Lambda function no longer works. You'll see in here that it's highlighted red. It failed. I can go down here and I can see like what happened. So there was a yeah, basically stock price 111 is not defined. So that's the other beauty of this, is it ties together all of your infrastructure. So like if you're trying to like in an event-driven architecture, like that's one way of building things, and so you have events kind of going around all over the place, and in some cases that can become like a little just hard to navigate, and sometimes it's best to kind of combine together like both events and workflows and kind of leverage the strengths of each of those. And so like you might have a workflow that's like triggered by an event, but then like once you're in that workflow, it gives you this nice level of visibility into like whatever goes wrong anywhere, you've got a good level of visibility in it. And then like my like Lambda log is like CloudWatch log for my Lambda function is one click away. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful.
Awesome, Dan. What else do you want to show us in the demo?
I think that's pretty much it. You can just maybe show a couple of things. So like here's all of the executions that my historical executions. So you can filter these, and yet like you can look at the ones that failed, and then you can drill down into them. The execution history, great way to, as I mentioned, like navigate. Like if let's say you have nested state machines, the resource over here, it'll link you to like the resource and the logs associated with it. So just this like drill down capability is great. And you know what? Let's try something else. So X-ray. So I don't think that I have X-ray properly enabled for this, but when you do have X-ray properly like set up and enabled, and you trace through your state machines, you'll get an X-ray trace map ID, and you can click on that, and you can go over to X-ray and look at your executions. Really important especially if you're like doing a lot of like high volume, low latency, or you have a really high volume, low latency use case, and you want to figure out where that latency is being eaten up. This is a great way to do it. I mean, everything also is timestamped down here as part of the execution, and then you can export the graphs. So you can download to SVG, PNG image, change the layout if you like horizontal. So like when people are building ML pipelines, I know that's the view they often like. And then over time, we'll add more like export capabilities as well, such as like the ability to export to CloudFormation. So that's pretty much all I've got. Actually, let me just show you two more things. So local development, if you're looking at what tools we support for local development, there's a link.
Can I make a feature request on the export thing?
Yes. Export
to ASCII art.
Yes. Okay. Let's bring it back memories. Export to, yeah. So I'll file that one with the team. Some of them might be listening right now. And one other thing I want to point out, because I mentioned it can be kind of tricky to craft the data flow for your workflow. So this is a little simulator that helps you out, and you can actually like edit the code here, and it shows you the before and after, right? So I could say .library .movies, and it shows me how it like filters the JSON file or the JSON input, and I can kind of click across and basically you can basically experiment with this, craft your input and output handling logic, and this is a lot of something else that customers have told us is really helpful to them. But I don't want to take up more of everyone's time. So hopefully, I think I've pretty much covered off everything that I wanted to show today.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody in chat has gotten a great lesson from just watching here. If we have any CTAs, producers, please drop them into chat. We're at the end of our episode. Dan, thank you so much for being here. We are, Jenna and I are builders from the DevRel team, and I think this is one of the things that we're going to look into more closely just from our end. This is so cool, and the visual element of this, of how powerful it is at kind of communicating sometimes complicated processes and then adding all these best practices around retries and error handling. That's just so cool. And I think there's a lot here that we need to dive into. But I think everybody here watching, hopefully you feel the same way. If you don't, of course, let us know in chat. We'll drop the survey link in again. If you have any feedback about any of these sections, we'll certainly pass them on to the service team members and the guests here. But with that, that brings us to the end of our episode.